Reconvened in open session. We have no action on closed session items, so we will jump right into the board members' reports. We will start with the activity report. Ms. Helliger. Turn your microphone on. Just read it quick.
The board activity report for the month of February. Austin trip with our board leadership academy training, presentation to Sugar Land Rotary, audit committee meeting, vision and planning committee meeting, Fort Bend Chamber Chairman's Gala, Chinese New Year dinner, Chinese Baptist Church New Year dinner, speak to Cub Scout Pack at Connie Bend Elementary School, Fort Bend Cares Gala, TASB Grassroots meeting, Fort Bend Chambers Halsworth Academy presentation by LCISD Superintendent Thomas Randall, TEA Special Education and Continuing Advisory Committee meeting, school district interviews for the HEB Awards, Fort Bend Education Sponsor Party, MASBA Mexican American School Board Member Conference, Touchdown Club Sportsmanship Awards, mentoring at Ridgemont Elementary School, Ridgemont, NSBA Advocacy Institute, Missouri City Black History Celebration, Fort Bend Chamber State of the City, Board Leadership Academy, Area Girls Basketball Playoff Games, Policy Committee meeting, SHAC meeting, Science Honor Society Elkins High School, Math Honor Society Elkins Teacher of the Year walkthrough, and interviews, Mayor Owens Surface Water Treatment Plant Tour. And that concludes our monthly report.
Thank you, Ms. Helliger. We will now go to board special reports. We will start with Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mrs. Tassan. I would like to report on the Advocacy Institute that I attended with Mr. Rice, Mr. Burdine, and Mr. George. It was in Washington, D.C. and sponsored by the NSBA, the National School Boards Association. There were many sessions that we attended on pressing issues on the federal agenda that were related to education. And these sessions updated us on these issues and allowed us to meet and network with trustees from all over the United States. We also had a chance to reconnect with the large delegation from Texas. On Tuesday, February 6th, we called upon our Texas delegation members, which included Senator John Cornyn, Senator Ted Cruz, Congressman Pete Olson, and Congressman Al Green. We discussed many issues with them, including reauthorization of the Carl Perkins Act for Career and Technical Education, the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, from 1975, and updates to the outdated FERPA laws, which were put in place in 1974. We also discussed appropriations issues related to Title I, Title II, and IDEA. The good news is that there are bills that have been written that would help solve some of the problems related to these bills and the fact that they haven't been reauthorized. But the bills really need to gain some support and traction in the legislature for them to continue. We found our legislators, and I'll say particularly Congressman Olson, who met with us, he was the only one who met with us personally and really engaged with us, to be receptive to our concerns. Senator Cornyn was very busy with negotiations for the temporary budget patch that they were working on. He did stop by and visit briefly with the Texas trustees that were present. Overall, the legislators were very distracted by the negotiations on the overdue federal budget. And even now, the federal government does not have an approved budget and is still operating under emergency funding measures. So I would say I was going to say expedition. I don't know if that might be the right word. It was successful in that we felt like we got to talk about our school district and the issues facing it, but it was frustrating because our legislators were distracted by other topics. The conference was well attended by approximately 800 school board trustees from around the country, and the Texas delegation was the second largest delegation there. So we were very proud to represent our school district in Fort Bend ISD.
Thank you, Mrs. James, and thanks to you guys for going and for representing us well. We appreciate it. Next up, Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mrs. Tassan. Over the weekend, I attended the Mexican American School Board Association, or MASBA, annual conference in San Antonio. That's a voluntary nonprofit statewide educational or association that has served local Texas school boards since 1970. It's focused on closing the opportunity and achievement gaps for all students, particularly Hispanic students and English language learners. It was well attended. Over 300 attendees were there, and there were many good speakers. Among the presenters were Mr. A.J. Craybill, Deputy Commissioner, former West Virginia Governor Bob Wise, who now represents the Alliance for Excellent Education, had a very interesting comment. In West Virginia, the teachers are on strike. He says the economy in West Virginia is down because of the industries that they have and because it's not that big. Teachers that live along the border of their 4 other states work in other states, make $10,000 a year more than they do in West Virginia. That's real. He's really glad he's not the governor right now. We also had former Texas State Representative Dr. Michael Villarreal, who was presenting on the state of Texas 60 by 30 initiative, in which they hope to get 60% of all 25 to, I think, 30-year-olds by the year 2030, which, if my math is correct, is in 12 years. An associate's degree, a bachelor degree, or certificate or something, 60% of the population. Right now, it's pretty low, and so to call that a stretch goal would be generous. We're never going to make it unless we do things like dual credit. So he was talking about dual credit. And higher ed's got an issue with state funding as well. So dual credit is a problem for our community colleges because they're not getting any revenue, and the students can potentially graduate from high school with an associate's degree and maybe not even go to the community college. So it's something that is on their minds. But it's bold moves like that is the only way that has a chance of coming close to the goal. There was a very good question from my associate, Mr. George Scott, who's from Katy ISD, who asked Dr. Villarreal, well, what is better to get, AP classes or dual credit? And he replied that AP classes are better for the kids to participate in if they're planning on attending college outside the state of Texas, because the other universities recognize that more than they do dual credit. But 95% of the kids that graduate are going to school in Texas. So there's a place for both of them. I thought it was a very interesting and insightful comment. Former mayor of San Antonio and 10th Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Henry Cisneros was there, and former San Antonio ISD Superintendent Robert Duran was there. We did have an update from a lobbyist who commented on the governor's plan to require future bond elections to pass with a 2/3 majority in which 30% of the registered voters vote. So that's a pretty tall hurdle. I talked to a number of folks there. Whenever I hear people say, "Oh, that'll never pass," it always worries me, because when people say that, they're usually the same people that don't vote. And he also wants to put a cap on property tax revenue at 2.5%. So even Paul Bettencourt was smart enough to exclude school districts in his 4% cap, and now a 2% cap. And I would just like to remind the folks back at home watching us on TV that this year, Fort Bend ISD's property wealth increased 5%, and we have an $18 million shortfall. It took a lot of political courage to solve by increasing the M&O tax rate 2% or 2 cents and reducing the INS 4 cents. But at the time, we thought we were going to have a TRE. And so last year, Mrs. Tasson, Mr. Burdine, and Mr. George were all up for election. They voted for that, knowing that we were going to have, or thinking we were going to have a tax referendum election. They voted for it anyway because it was the right thing to do. So not to put too fine a point on it, Texas has 28 million people in it. There are more people moving here every day. We're educating fully 10% of all the children in the United States of America. And those people are moving here. They don't know about this. So if this passes, then in the next couple of years, we probably won't pass a bond. And our schools are going to get more and more overcrowded, and we're going to have less money to even serve the kids that we do have. Remember, we lost $18 million in revenue when our property values plummeted from 10% to 5%. And each year, the comptroller looks back at what was your bump last year? Oh, you got 10%, so if that's worth $18 million, when we send you a check, we're going to subtract $18 million, and now the revenue is only 5%. And they funded us as if we were at 7.5%. We're 2.5% lower than that. So it's really a shell game, and I don't know if the state of Texas, we would get in such a jam. I think it might take, years to untangle that. So I'll stop there on school finance because I always get carried away. But I would like to recommend, Dr. Dupree, that Fort Bend ISD consider joining MASBA. 26% of our student population is Hispanic. I think that's a compelling reason. I don't know if we can afford it. If we can't, I'll just continue to attend the meetings and I'll just pay for it myself. End of report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, and thank you for attending on our behalf and bringing us back that valuable information. Mr. Burdine.
Okay, I wanted to give a quick update. First off, I want to apologize for being a little bit late today. I was in San Marcos as of yesterday, started doing some work and was there all day today in regards to the Texas School Safety Center. Chief Ryder spoke about it earlier, and the letter that went out by the governor last Wednesday mentioned the Texas School Safety Center as a resource for districts in the state of Texas in regards to school safety. So the Texas School Safety Center was part of the chapter, it's a chapter 37 of the Texas Education Code. It is in the Texas Education Code. Part of the governor's Homeland Security Code. It is a research, training, technical strategic plan support organization. So anywhere from tobacco prevention to e-cigarettes to bullying. Of course, the big topic today, we talked for hours about school safety, and I mentioned this earlier. It's getting really hot in here. I don't know if we, besides the point, but we talked a whole lot today about school safety, and I made a comment to Chief Ryder. It's amazing how prepared we are as a district. Like I said, we have representation from all over the state of Texas, some large, some small districts. But I can tell you, I left there feeling sad in some ways because of the vulnerabilities of so many people in our state of Texas. At the same time, I felt so happy because we're part of an organization that has done what we said we were going to do. I know when we first got on the board, safety and security was a really big priority. We followed through with that in our bond program. Simple things like locks on your doors, video cameras. These are simple things that not all schools have. They had a big, thick book about half the size of this that really was a generic plan that any district could implement. And what was interesting about it is it really was very simple, because regardless of whatever the situation was, it really didn't matter. It was more of what we have as a lockdown procedure, right? So you go and you lock all your doors. If you don't have a lock, you barricade them. And you remain in your room, because the people that enter these schools are cowards and they will go for the path of least resistance. And of course, we can't stop those types of things, but we can mitigate our risk. And it was really those two simple things: locking your doors, which I'm really happy to hear that we have doors on all of our rooms in our district, which is huge. And then another was video cameras. We have that. Mental health was something that was talked about. We talked about that earlier here at our board meeting. Alert trainers. So these alert trainers go out from the Texas School Safety Center all over the state of Texas and train districts on situations like this. We have these in our own district. So which is huge. I mean, we can actually take our people and go teach more people, but that was a really huge win. I could go on and on about it. It was encouraging, like I said, for us, although it's discouraging for others. And I just got on this board, I don't know, a year or so ago, and I would really like some help from my fellow board members trying to figure out a way that we can help this organization. So this organization is funded by the Texas legislature, and we know that's an issue because funding continues to go down, right? Health and Human Services Commission, State Health Services, and the Governor's Criminal Justice Division. And the problem with this is the information doesn't get out to everybody. Not all districts have the resources like we do, or a police department like we do. And so they're dependent upon someone like the Texas School Safety Center, which does some of the best research in the country in regards to school safety. But we need to figure out a way to get this out to other districts. We need to make that connection. I had talked before with them about maybe getting together with TASB. I think that there's a connection there. It's sort of like some of their blank policy that we have that we adopt. I think that we could have something like that where TASB could offer a generic plan for people that don't have plans. I could go on and on. I appreciate the time, and that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you for serving. We appreciate that. Mr. Rosenthal.
Well, we've been talking about some pretty serious stuff and sad stuff, so I'm going to change that around a little bit. No, this is good. I'd just like to say that over the past month, Mr. Burdine and myself have served on Teacher of the Year committees, and we did walkthroughs and whatnot, and interviews and things. And I'd just like to say that I'm so impressed with some of the things that are going on in our classrooms. I really am. I was so proud walking through those schools and just seeing the great teaching and learning that's going on. And in my opinion, there's just been such an improvement over the years. And I was just very proud to be part of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Thanks for sharing that. I think the board would echo that. There are some great things going on in Fort Bend ISD, due in large part to some of the people in this room and the teachers who are in our classrooms. I'll wrap this up really quickly. I, like Mr. Burdine, was appointed recently by the governor to the Special Education Continuing Advisory Committee. We had our first meetings over 2 days, February 12th and 13th. And this is a committee that is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is required to have 17 members. And the majority of the members must be individuals with disabilities or parents of children with disabilities. At our first meeting, we did some housekeeping things, but the main thing that was on the agenda was giving input on the corrective action plan that Texas is required by the federal government to work on and to present to address the failure of Texas to educate thousands of children with disabilities due to the de facto cap that was imposed by TEA on the identification of children who qualify to receive services under IDEA. Many of you know that they've been gathering input from stakeholders over the last several months, and we were able to sit and give some direct input and feedback as well. They are gathering that data, putting together a draft, and we will go back on March 19th to review that draft and to give further input and to TEA, and then to try to come up with something that will go back to the federal government. So that's primarily what we'll be working on, since that's what's kind of needs to be addressed immediately. I will say, just my personal opinion, I struggle a bit with the plan and the fact that they think it's only going to cost $84 million to do some of the things that they think are in the plan. That's not enough money. I think we all had agreed to that, the entire committee. But the main thing that I wanted Fort Bend ISD to take back is that the plan does place the burden on the school districts to evaluate the students who fell through the cracks, and then to identify them, to evaluate them, and then there's some money in there for compensatory services, which is woefully inadequate, in my opinion, to go back and give those services. So my expectation is that even more of the burden is going to fall on the local, the LEA, on us. And so, as Mr. Rice said earlier, we're probably going to have a $7 billion shortfall, which means education will be cut. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what they're going to do next session. And then we will have this pile on of having to go back and identify students, which should be done, and giving them compensatory services. And I think that the burden's going to be shifted to us. And that doesn't even count the increase in students who are going to be identified, because I don't see Dina Hill here tonight, but we've already identified about a 30% increase in Fort Bend ISD so far in students with disabilities being identified, and we have no more money to educate these kids. So we're identifying more, and we're not even really at the percentage where we think we ought to be, more than likely should be, which is kind of in the 10 to 12% range. So we have a long way to go, and we have no more money. So you should have gone last, Mr. Rosenthal. But that's the update on that
Go
committee.
again.
And it's been my honor to serve, and the upside of that is that we are getting better in Texas, and we realize we need to get better, and so we're going to keep working on it for our kids. So that ends our special reports this evening, and we will now go to our consent agenda. May I have a motion? Does anyone have anything they want to pull off of the consent agenda? Mr. Rice.
I would like to pull off 11C, 1A, 1, 2, and 3.
Anything else? With that, may I have a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve the consent agenda item as presented with the exception of 11C, 1A, 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. George. Do we have discussion? Mrs. James.
I think one of the ones he pulled off is the one I wanted to discuss.
Okay. Then if we have no discussion, please vote. Just wanted to make sure. Motion passes.
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda item 11C, 1A, 1 as presented.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Rice.
My comment is I would like, I personally would like to see the construction bids included in this, in all of these construction projects in the future. We do have the CSP evaluation, but we don't have the construction bids themselves. Other than that, I have no comment.
Which one is yours? That's not one. Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. May I
Madam
have,
President, I move to approve consent agenda item 11C1A2 as presented.
Second.
we have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have discussion? Mrs. James?
Well, my first question would be, Mr. Rice, I think they gave us the CSPs, but you're asking for something different on these.
I'm asking that when we're asked to vote on something, the construction bids for these items be included with the CSP evaluation. If you look at the CSP evaluation, the construction bids are not included in there. So we do not know how the other contractors' bids came out.
Right.
Now,
So-
I know we were provided that information late today, but I didn't have time to pull it out and compare it. And so I really think that we should have that. Now, if nobody else cares about it, okay. But that's my request.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Rice. I just wanted to clarify. So I agree. I think we should have that information. And we've had the situation come up before where we not even had the evaluation, the scoring. So I agree. We need to get it consistently going every time.
And I agree as well.
Okay. And then I have another comment. Go ahead. Thank you, Kristen is like my mom today. She's so helpful. I guess I'd like to bring up, this item is bid package 25, and has including the facilities upgrades that are under consideration at Lakeview Elementary. And so I just want us to look at this with our eyes open, because if we vote on this as it's presented, by the end of the summer, Lakeview will be the only campus in our district that will not have a security vestibule. This is what I understand, that will not have a security vestibule. They'll be delaying the access control project, which is a district-wide initiative. They will not have an emergency generator installed like every other campus will have, and nor will they have the exterior lighting updates and upgrades that were part of the original promised bond program for 2014. So to me, that's a lot of vulnerability, and that's a lot of concern. And I can say, as I mentioned earlier, that I've spoken to a lot of parents and some staff members, and they've expressed some concern. I guess I'm willing to go forward with the project as it's presented to us, with the understanding, because I think I brought this up last week, that there are some renovations, a bigger renovation project that's on the horizon. But I guess I'd like to hear from Mr. Perez. Well, I guess I'd like to hear two things. Maybe Mr. Pham can update us on the security cameras there, because I asked that earlier, and I think you might have that information.
Yes, ma'am. I found the status, and the wireless project was commissioned at Lakeview this past beginning of February, and usually the cameras are installed about a month or two afterward, and so we are on schedule to deploy the cameras within the next 2 months.
Okay, so we should have that safety item installed then by the end of the semester. So that's,
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that. And I guess what I'd like to know is if you, Mr. Perez, if you could just give us a little bit of an update on what kind of the plan forward you would, what you might envision for Lakeview, and how we can expect that community, what they can expect in the future. I guess is I want to understand what the plan is for the renovations and the updates and the safety upgrades at Lakeview.
Yes, ma'am. All of those are included. We're looking at any further work at Lakeview being tied into the approved facilities master plan that we're working on, as we speak. And then from that, what we would do would be to prioritize Lakeview, any renovations that are going to be done there, or if the building is going to be taken down and rebuilt, would go into phase one of the next bond, so that could be one of the first things that's occurring. And then in the meantime, we will retain a security guard, as the chief said, on location at that building. In addition, one of the good things here is that we literally, that is designed and it is actually priced. So if we needed to, in the very near future, go ahead and move forward and mobilize with that construction, we could come back to the board with a change order because we already have pricing and we could move forward. But the long-range plan at this point would be to go ahead and follow the facilities master plan that we're working on at this time.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and I'm glad to hear you talk about putting it in phase one, because these families in the Lakeview community have been very patient for a long time, and it's quite disappointing for them actually to realize, okay, we have to wait again. So I just want everybody to realize that, because they're concerned, and just like all the other parents in our district, they're worried. So. And I did have a couple calls from staff members as well, so just so we all know what we're talking about.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Do we have additional discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, Oscar, could you just, again, go over what is in the budget for Lakeview? I mean, I see the $1.7 million, and what does that cover?
That covers, it's the roofing, it's mechanical equipment that's going in there, but it is not any of the access control or the security vestibule. That was all, it was outside of the budget. So this is, what we were able to cover was just roofing and some of the mechanical work to be
Okay.
able to make sure that the building can operate in the next, few years while we get ready
Okay.
to go ahead and do the additional work.
I remember a few weeks ago you were saying how you would have to do a whole bunch of other work to get, some of the stuff that you originally wanted to do because of either stuff in the ceiling you found or the flooring or something like that.
Well, so what we're speaking about was the floor-to-ceiling heights in that building are a lot shorter than they are in a building that we would build today.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mr. Rice?
Mr. Perez, what's the, how much would it cost to do the things we've just taken out of Lakeview?
Sir, I would need to get back to you on that. I don't have it just right off the top of my head.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that we've got a report here that says we've got $15 million in the contingency right now.
That is correct.
So I'm just wondering why we have to wait on that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to say, along with Mrs. James' concern, we have to be careful to do what we say we're going to do. So if this was in the 2014 bond and now we've changed our mind, it makes me think, I wonder if we've done an adequate job of communicating that to the community. So I fully understand what Mrs. James is saying, that the community is, well, you told us we were going to do it, we voted for it, now you're not going to do it, and now maybe you're going to put it in the next bond. Well, we don't even know if we're going to have a next bond, and we don't even know if it will pass. And so when we talk about floor-to-ceiling heights, maybe we should think of an alternative HVAC system like VRF, because that doesn't take up any room. And Lakeview is an old school, and so maybe we should think outside the box on that instead of just trying to, instead of not thinking outside the box. So when will we know? I guess we're not going to know until November. So when you say it can be added quickly in, that's really not true. It won't be added in this year if the bond doesn't pass. And if the bond does pass, I dare say it will be another year before any work is done there. So that's a long time to go without at least a safety and security vestibule.
Yes, sir, and for clarification, when I was saying that we could add it quickly is, we do have the full scope that was in bond 2014 is bid, and we have an amount on that. We could change order that in, based on the 15 million that you just spoke about.
Yeah, but when would you make that decision? It sounds like you wouldn't make that decision until we know whether or not a bond is passed. And if the bond does pass, again, we're going to have to hire another architect, whatever you're going to do with Lakeview in the future. That's going to take at least 6 months to get somebody under contract. And then another probably 9 months to get anything designed. And so it'll be 2020 before any work happens. So what are we gonna do in the meantime to protect all the kids there at Lakeview?
So, just, I guess I wanted just to add real quickly to his question though, is, could you explain then why we can't use the money from the 15 million? I don't think I heard the answer.
We,
Okay, well, yes, ma'am, no, it can be used. We did not bring that recommendation forth, but it can be used. The amount that we needed was well within the 15 million. So we could bring that back to the board. It's already bid. We could go ahead and do a change order, and we could start on that work immediately. The idea was that since we did not have the facilities master plan complete, we wanted to do that before we went ahead and did this work, and then came right back and tore it out if we needed to go ahead and take that building.
yeah, so it was my understanding from the workshop that the reason this was being recommended to us was because the facilities master plan, which is ongoing right now, the steering committee is making a determination right now about what needs to be done with Lakeview, which may include demolition or may include some major structural changes. And that this, if we put this money in now, that it could, we would might have to rip it out and start over within the year. So is my understanding correct?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay, so it's not that we didn't have the money, it was the recommendation was to wait because it might have to be pulled out. And then we asked earlier, how were we gonna keep the kids safe in the meantime? And Chief Ryder gave us some alternatives if we moved forward and how to keep the staff and the children on that campus safe until we made a determination, or the steering committee made a determination, or at least a recommendation for the board to consider in the future.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, so,
Yeah, I take no exception to any of that. It's just unfortunate we couldn't have had this determination in 2014 when we passed the bond. And so I'm just gonna suggest that as we go forward with planning a bond now, I hope that we don't do this again, because I know Chief Ryder's gonna take some steps, but now we're talking about M&O money, I think, to protect the kids, and I just wonder why at least we wouldn't try to put in a vestibule at Lakeview, or at least some of the safety things, especially in light of everything that's transpired. It's okay to get recommendations, and y'all are studying it. I have no idea when you're gonna be done. But if they decide to demolish that building, that will have to wait until we pass a bond, which will be in November, and nothing is gonna happen until 2019, and it will be months before any design work is started or finished, and then it will be 2020 before any construction is done, and you know that. And so I'll just let it go at that, but it's poor planning. Thank you.
is there any more discussion? Mr. Rosenthal? Nope. Okay, hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. May I have a motion for the next item?
Madam President, I move to approve item 11C1A3 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have discussion on this item?
Just one last time, I want to recommend that, and then Dr. Dupree, I know you've heard the board's comments. Is that something that we can do in the future?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. No further discussion, please vote. Motion passes. For action item number 12A1, we are now going to consider certification of unopposed candidates, and approval of order to cancel the May 5th, 2018 election, and declare Ms. Grail James elected to position 2 and Ms. Addie Helliger elected to position 6. May I have a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. James, and we have a second by Ms. Helliger. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote.
Better not be a no vote on this one.
Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. All right, next item is to consider approval of purchases exceeding $50,000. We have library materials, supplies, and related items. May I have a motion?
Motion to approve this item as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have questions or discussion on this item? Mrs. James?
I just mentioned in a note that I sent in, but when we were in Washington D.C., we heard from one of the congressmen that there were funds available through the Library of Congress for replacement of library materials that are lost in disasters. So encourage, I think the administration is looking into that, and I just wanted the board to know that's one of the things that we found out during our visit, and so hopefully we can get some library materials. Willow Ridge and Seguin, I think, will be coming, when they get back online and so forth. So hopefully we can follow up on, get some grants on that.
Thank you, Mrs. James. There's no additional discussion. Please vote. Motion passes. Next up, we are considering another purchase exceeding $50,000, clinic supplies, equipment, and related items. May I have a motion?
Madam President, I move the recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have questions or discussion on this item? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Next up is to review future board meeting agenda items. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, ma'am. We'll be back next Monday with the March workshop. This is one of those funky months where
Yes.
things are going to be real tight. We're going to be talking about the budget. Well, actually, next workshop, we have no reports. It'll be just the agenda review, but it is the literacy tour. And Addie's going to have the closest commute to get home after next week's meeting, because it's going to be in her community at Burton Elementary School. But in March 26th, we're going to do a full-blown budget development update. We're tentatively scheduled for safety and security, but this is just a placeholder. It may be April, once the committee gets formed, to do another more thorough report on that. We're going to have a number of policies for you as well. In April, this refers to policies in March. Those are not going to be in March. But there you can see a few contracts, a few more bond program items, and I'm not going to belabor anything else. You can read
That's
it.
good, thank you. Okay, if we have nothing else, I need a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
We are adjourned.